Hey, Lisa.
Hi,
Nice
Donna.
to hear. So I'm Donna Chacko, and I'm here with Serenity and Health. And it's really very special for me to have our guest today. And more important to me personally, she's my very next door neighbor, which makes this a very special conversation. So really thrilled to have her. Um, Besides being my neighbor, she's been a very busy lady ever since I've known her. And you'll hear more about her background, but basically she's psychiatric nurse practitioner and has worked with our military for years. And now she's a head nurse at the Veterans Administration and one of the in the psych unit. She'll tell us a bit about her background, but it's very broad and it includes psychiatry and ministry. And just this year, in the middle of the pandemic, she completed her doctorate in ministry leadership, right? Is that how you say it? At Wesley Theological Institute. So I know Lisa as somebody we have tea with and go on walks for, and we've prayed together, we've cried together, we've laughed together. We had a pretty significant conversation this spring when George Floyd was killed. So it's very special to have her as a neighbor and friend, and it's wonderful to have her here today. So Lisa, tell us how in the world you got to do all these things you do in your life. It's just a wonderful story.
Well, Donna, first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this. And it's a wonderful thing to have you and Wilbur as neighbors and to just be blessed with our relationship and our friendship as it has grown over time. So I'm truly grateful for that. So I started out in nursing school back in, and actually been a nurse almost 35 years. And I went to nursing school and I knew right away I wanted to be a psychiatric nurse. I was really irritated that I had to take all those other courses because I just wanted to be a psych nurse. I was fortunate to get a job right out of nursing school where I started working as a psychiatric nurse in pediatric psychiatry. And I got to work with children and adolescents with severe mental health disorders. I then moved to the old St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which at the time was called the Commission on Mental Health Services. And I was a nurse manager on the children's unit. And it was that point I became a United States Public Health Service officer. And I was able to stay at St. Elizabeth's because it was high-risk population and there weren't many people with my specialty. So I stayed at St. Elizabeth's for about 7 years. Then I started teaching. I started at the University of the District of Columbia where I graduated from nursing school. They welcomed me back to the faculty. And then shortly thereafter, I got a call to interview at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. And the dean at the time said she wasn't interested wasn't prepared to hire anyone, but she just wanted to meet me in case there were some openings. By the time we finished, I had a job. I started about 3 weeks later. I stayed at Hopkins for about 12 years. Then I worked in several different places across the city in mental health programs, in outpatient, on inpatient units. I worked in a day hospital where patients came to be treated during the day and went home at night. Then I moved over to Walter Reed Army Military Medical Center, the old one on Georgia Avenue. And then around 2011, I moved to the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I get them confused. Anyway, I was out there again, now working with combat veterans and their families. So these are people that served in either Operation Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom, where they came back from Afghanistan. So I began to do individual work, trauma work, and then I branched out into couple work. And I was given the opportunity to do couples retreats, whereby we take couples who were stricken with PTSD and work on their relationship, also help them to develop skills to manage their PTSD symptoms together as a couple, and to help improve their communication and sort of relationship enhancement kinds of things. So I had the privilege of doing that and then becoming a trainer for the Department of Defense, where I went across the country to teach them about that treatment, which was called cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy for couples with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had the privilege of doing that.
That
And so
very challenging and rewarding, and appreciate it, because not a service very available, I would think, is it?
not that much. Yeah. So then about 2 years ago, I moved over to the Veterans Administration, where I became the nurse manager of the acute inpatient unit for psychiatry, or we call it behavioral health now. And so I've been there for about 2.5 years, and that's been quite an experience working with our veterans, having worked 16 years with the active duty population. It's somewhat different, but still rewarding.
So tell us how the ministry fits in with this, because I know you, and I know you don't put your ministry over here and your nursing over here. I know they're connected.
Very true. So as I have been the psychiatric nurse for all this time, I always had a sense that there was a need to include the spiritual part of a person in our work. But, you have the idea that you're not supposed to, there's supposed to be a demarcation between church and state, and then between religion and politics, and even psychiatry and spirituality don't always go together. But for me, I thought it was...
To some others of us, they go.
For some people. In my professional world in psychiatry, they don't always go together. But as a nurse, it's always been a part of our assessment that we look at a person's spiritual health. And so I felt like I needed to have some additional training. So not only could I assess it, but I could also help people that had spiritual struggles. So that's how I ended up in seminary, with the idea that I was going to do counseling and Christian counseling, so that I could be a secular counselor and a spiritual counselor. So whatever my clients needed, I would be able to address either one. And just a funny thing happened on the way to seminary. That's when I met my husband, and I took a break from seminary and focused on married life. But at that point, I began to use the things that I learned from seminary related to Christian counseling in my work. And it turned out that the people that had spiritual issues typically failed me. And we ended up being just matched. And as a part of my assessment, I'd ask, well, how's your spiritual life? And then the floodgates would open. And so I recognized that it was very, very important to be able to treat mind, body, and spirit. And so I've been doing it that way ever since.
Yeah. Well, to those of you who know anything about me, you can understand why I'm drawn to Lisa, because that's my thing also. I mean, I guess the longer we stay in this business and go through our own life experiences, I just realized that medicine is just so much more than like a specific disease and a diagnosis. It's a complex thing of life experiences and suffering and relationship messes, and that's who we are as a people, I guess, sometimes. Anyways, well, that's a wonderful recapture. But Lisa, one thing that I want you to explain is how all this time most of the time you've been working full time, and a lot of this time you've been in school to get these degrees. But I know you've also been a minister during most of this time, correct?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
How does that work? What did you do? How do you do all that?
As much as I preach and teach and share about self-care, every now and then I have to pay attention to the fact that I'm not always that good at it, and I have to practice what I preach. But I've always been the kind of person who would do multiple things at the same time. One, because I have a lot of energy. Two, because I feel like it's important to be able to address multiple areas of creativity at the same time. And I think it also comes from my parents. My father was born in 1920, and he got his PhD when he was in 1946. And this was during the height of racism and Jim Crow and segregation. And he just always reminded me that you have to work harder than most to get just a little bit. And so the struggle is real. And so I've always just done multiple things at the same time because that's the way you get ahead these days. And so the good part is that there's been a synergy in all the things that I have done and all the things that I'm excited about. I got to do it one time. So I love to study. I love to read. I love to teach. I love to preach. And I love to counsel. So I managed to be able to do all of these things in the jobs that I had. So it was important to me to make sure that I got the education that would allow me and the credentials that would allow me to do this at a professional level. And so that was part of my motivation.
You know, just reminiscing slightly about your little graduation backyard Zoom celebration we had with, you know, like 6 people maybe, and masks and oops. Okay.
I'm here. So that was really sweet. One of the neighbors came by, and Tommy's a jogger, and somebody I've been praying for years because Tommy's had some significant illnesses, and so every now and then I'll see him in the morning as he runs by, and I always want to know how he's doing. I let him know I'm praying for him, and so he came over with a little treat. And he said, "Lisa, we got to have a party to celebrate your graduation." And I'm like, "I'm not celebrating graduation. We're in the midst of a pandemic. Our graduation was canceled, and so that's okay." He said, "I insist." It was so precious for the neighbors to come over in the backyard, and we had our social distancing party. We were coupled off together with little tables, and we had little treats. And do you know they made me come in with I put on my father's mortarboard, because when he graduated from Northwestern, I put on his mortarboard, and I walked in, and Donna played Pomp and Circumstances, and they stood up and they applauded. It was just so precious. And I hold that as my celebration because it means a lot to have your neighbors, people that recognize your accomplishments and be so insistent upon celebrating you. So it was a treat, and I was really grateful.
You know, this whole interview and just this discussion just reminds me of something that I've thought of often, which is, you know, we know people and we think we know them, but when you really, really have a chance to talk to somebody and learn a lot more about them, and this is just half hours, not that long, but still, there's like this deep well of wonderfulness and fascinating backgrounds in all of our neighbors and people, and we don't know it. We don't know it. What a loss. Anyways, so now you are, I know, working at the VA.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a struggle because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Full-time hospital work during a pandemic. How has that gone?
So the work at the VA has been very stressful. As you hear in the news, we have had a good number of staff and patients that have been stricken with COVID-19. And so the requirement for social distancing, to wear PPE for 8 to 12 hours a day, to constantly be taking care of people who are sick to the point where you're not sure they're going to live or die is very, very stressful. The idea that at any time we could be exposed once again to COVID-19 is also an additional stressor. One of the things I've had the privilege of doing is being a part of a critical incident stress debriefing team. And so we've gone from different units to talk to the staff about how COVID-19 and how caring for patients with this virus has affected them. How are they coping? How are they taking care of themselves? How and if they're implementing self-care strategies. And so there's been a wide variety of responses, but most of the time people are just scared and anxious. They don't want to catch the virus. They don't want to take it home to their families, yet they're absolutely dedicated and wanting to take care of the veterans at the same time. So it's quite a conundrum, and I just give all credit to my colleagues at the VA who desire to continue to take care of our patients the very best they can under these difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I can't hardly imagine, because I mean, not even being exposed in a clinical way, just like all of us are exposed in some way. It's
Yeah.
scary, and you have to face it in a much more real way every single day. I know that you're going to share with us. I always ask what take-home messages, advice, when you have as much experience as you have, Lisa, through the years, you have lots of things you've learned that could tell us. But try and if you have any specific take-home messages, and I know you brought something you can share with us that we can screen share and all look at together. So
Okay. Well, two things. One thing, I wanted to share one of my favorite Bible passages that's related to self-care. And it comes from the book of 3rd John. And it is the second, third, and fourth verse. And I'm going to read it.
okay.
And it says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoice greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. For I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth." And I love that scripture for a couple of reasons. One, the idea that we should prosper as our souls prosper. And the idea that we absolutely do have to take care of ourselves, our minds, our spirits, and our bodies. And prosperity looks different. It's not about collecting wealth. It is about being in good health. Because if we have good health, we have pretty much everything that we need. The other thing that I think about is the idea that we are in a time, in this, I call this time our corona captivity. And the idea that we are stuck at home and not able to do the things that we would normally do. But it is really a precious time for reflection and revision of some of the things that we do in life that are not so healthy. Since we've had to push the pause button on so many of our activities, now's the time to adapt some better self-care strategies, to cast off some things that are not so helpful and to take on some new things. And so I wanted to share a couple of things with you. I'm going to share my screen. It might be a little awkward, but we'll work it out.
We got this technology down, Lisa.
We do. Okay. So I want to go back. So I learned this one day. I was listening to Charles Stanley on the radio, and he taught me about the concept of HALT. And you probably already know this, but I want to reiterate it, and I try to live by it. And it says that self-preservation is a skill, and we should never let ourselves become too hungry, too angry, too lonely, or too tired. The reason being, if we are at any of these extremes, we are at risk for making poor decisions, for saying things that we'll be sorry for putting ourselves in situations that may be difficult to get out of. And so keeping in mind that paying attention and doing your own self-monitoring so that you recognize if you're in any of these places, what you need to do to take care of yourself in that moment. And that's what self-preservation looks like. And then the next thing that I wanted to share with you is my self-care toolkit. And I use this. One thing I didn't tell you is one of my jobs is I am student care coordinator at Wesley Theological Seminary, where I received my 2 degrees. And one of the things that I do with the students is I help them with self-care practices, but also if they have mental health or spiritual issues. And so one of the things, I do a workshop, and this is one of the slides from the workshop. So I thought I would share it with you. And so for my self-care toolkit, I say, don't leave home, don't live, don't practice, don't minister without them. And so I have these pictures, and people are always like, well, what do these pictures mean? So let me share. So the first thing you see is a group of 4. And this comes from the book of Mark chapter 5, where one gentleman was ill and his 4 friends took him before Jesus. And I learned this from a pastor friend of mine from South Carolina. And she reminded us that we need four types of friends in our lives. We need a cheerleader. We need a confidant. We need a critic. And we need a comedian.
I love that.
And the idea is that at any time in our lives, we'll need some wise counsel. And so it's important to have those people in your life that you can talk to who will give you what you need at the time. So the critic is the one that you want to review something and will give you exactly the truth and with no chaser. And it'll be the kind of detail and maybe the kind of truth that might be hard to swallow, but also very valuable. The cheerleader is the person that is always, no matter what's happening, they say, you go girl, or man, you got this thing. So you always need somebody that will cheer you on. The confidant is the one that you tell your deepest, darkest secrets, the one that won't repeat them, the one that won't criticize you or in any way chide you for sharing what's in your heart. And then the comedian. You always need somebody that you can call and's good for a laugh. Because every now and then life just gets to be so serious. You need somebody to just give you a tickle. So those are my 4 friends. The next thing is that nice gentleman who's praying. Your prayer life in the midst of a crisis is very, very important. But here's the thing. Your prayer life your prayer life in crisis is no better than your prayer life in calm times. So it's important to develop spiritual practices. I know that Donna is very, very much in favor of centering prayer. We have done that together. But there are multiple ways to pray, multiple ways to spend time with God. And it's equally as important to say what's on your heart as well as it is to listen. So we're not supposed to put all our requests before the Lord and then say amen. But it's always good to sit and to listen and to wait, because God usually wants to talk back, but sometimes we don't give him enough time. The next thing you'll see is my fence. Now, this is a nice tall wooden fence, and it represents having good boundaries. It's very important to have a 2-letter word in your vocabulary, and it's called no. It's very important to be able to recognize what your limits are, to be able to determine when you've had enough in a situation, to recognize who is good and healthy for you and who may not be, and how to determine that. It's also good to recognize that sometimes you just have to stop and make a good decision for yourself, which may be offensive to someone else. But if you don't save yourself, then you can't help anybody else, right? So boundaries are very, very important. Also, you also have to consider that people treat you the way you allow them to. And so sometimes you actually have to be direct and set limits on folks when they say things that might be offensive or inappropriate. And how you say it makes all the difference. But not saying it actually can perpetuate the problem. So sometimes, and Donna and I talk about this all the time, she says I'm so direct. But I learned something from Mary Poppins, and she says a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. So I always try to be sweet.
I have to say you're direct, Lisa, because I go the opposite to my detriment directions. I mean, I'm getting much better, but I always admire direct people, and I'm working at it. Wilbur doesn't think he thinks I'm very direct.
Well, that's good. He needs to think that. The next thing is my little person over here with a question mark.
Do you want to make the picture smaller because it's blocked by our images, I think?
I can. Let's see. Make it smaller.
Go back to the preceding picture so we can see it.
I moved that picture.
Huh?
I moved this. How about that?
All right. They haven't moved for me. So I don't know what the final recording will show, but right now they're blocked for me.
Okay, so if you move your picture of me around, it'll show the question mark.
Okay,
so,
there we go. Got it.
Good. All right, so the little man over there sitting on a rock is the idea that we really have to take time for reflection. And you know how, if you're like me, you're doing multiple things every day, all the time, fixing stuff, directing, helping people. When do you have time just to think? When do you have time just to sit and reflect? I'm learning to take 15 to 20 minutes just to sit and not do anything, not try to plan anything, and just see what washes over me, what thoughts come to my mind, and what things do I need to consider at another time. But just taking the time to think about something that's important to me that has nothing to do with anyone else is really important. The next on the bottom is all those sporting things, and that's to remind us to make sure you include some exercise and some playtime. And so exercise should be fun, and so find something to do that you like, that causes you to expend some energy, but also gives you some joy. And so maybe your particular ball is not in that picture, but finding something that makes you happy, that gives you energy while also exercising your body is always a good thing. And last is my psychiatric toilet. So I learned this skill way back when I was a very new nurse from a wonderful psychiatrist that I used to work with. And he said, Lisa, he was Iranian, and he said, Lisa, you must find a way to process your day and to let it go. So what he explained to me is that from the time that he left the office in his car to the time that he got to his house, he used that time to reflect what happened during that day and to assess what went well, what maybe didn't go so well, what other things he'd like to do, things that may have bothered him, and also things that he might have wanted to celebrate. And with the idea that if you can have transition time between your work and your home life, once you get home, you're better able to attend to what's going on. And the toilet is that once he got to the driveway, he would visualize whatever those cares were hitting the lever and being flushed away. So when he opened the door to his wife and his 3 little daughters, he could actually be engaged with what they are doing. And he said that made him a better psychiatrist, it made him a better husband, and it made him a better father because he could attend to what was going on in his home because he'd made that preparation and transition. So that's my psychiatric toilet. So what I do myself is in my short transition, I try to do the same thing. And when I get home, I flush the toilet, I open the door, and I wait to be greeted by my puppy and my husband and my son. And I hope to be prepared to deal with what they have for me. So that's my picture.
I was going to stop the screen share. I guess you have to stop it because you did it. You put
I'll stop.
So we're going to put the HALT and your don't go away without it. What did you call it again? Your package.
Self-care survival toolkit.
Self-care survival toolkit. That'll be available for everyone on the show notes. So that way you won't necessarily have to listen again and write them down because that's a great way to describe some, memorable tricks that will lead to health, especially emotional health. That last one, really, really, really good. Really excellent, Lisa. Really excellent. This is just been marvelous. So any last thing you want to say? Because we're nearing the end here. Last chance.
Last thing. Well, I just want to reiterate that self-care is not selfish. And that in this time when we're under such a great deal of stress with having to be home, and I also call this sequestration too. So being stuck at home, having to homeschool, having to work at home, having to do so many things at home. Sometimes our homes get transformed into something that's no longer comfortable, no longer safe. And so do what you can to carve out some special time for yourself, not just because you need it, but you actually deserve it. Know that the time that you spend taking care of yourself keeps you better prepared and better able to function and to deal with all the stress that you have to deal with from day to day. Right. So be good to yourself. You deserve it.
Very good. That's a wonderful way for us to end. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone who's listening to this. We're going to say goodbye now, and there'll be more pop-up conversations to come. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Donna. Bye-bye.